being able to challenge people a bit. I think that can be really important for their own learning. And so for myself, like whether it's speaking with family members or friends, if things are said that make me uncomfortable, I think in the past it was like, oh, I'm brushing it off because that's what that person, that's what they're like. And now it's like, nah, you know what? I'm gonna challenge them a bit on that one because I don't agree with what they're saying, and I don't think it's a right perception to put out there or right thoughts that someone should be thinking. And just being able to challenge it, I think, a bit more.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, today's episode was really enjoyable for me. It's been a long time coming. It's a subject that I've just been thinking about for a long time and trying to do justice. And finally, I found somebody that I think could do that. And that is Jessica Kaknevicius. Jessica is the VP of Education at SFI, that is the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. And she is also the co-founder of Women in Wood, which is the reason she is here. Now, Women in Wood is an online network of women helping them to, succeed in their career goals by collaborating, sharing information, improving their skills, and just generally helping each other navigate the workplace. And it's a really cool and unique thing, I think, out there. And like I said, it's only for women. And yeah, I wanted to get Jessica on to talk about some of the things that have come up while she has been a part of Women in Wood, and some of the, the major issues that continue to come up as a trend, and why these things are a problem, how are they happening, and just to talk about, equity and diversity in the workplace. And also, one of the major things I wanted to talk about was unconscious bias, which is something that everybody has, and which is a lot of what is standing in the way of true equity, I think, nowadays. And so we had a really honest and open conversation, I believe, about all those things, right? About how do we accomplish this? How do we move these barriers that exist that many of the people in the workplace don't even know exist? How do we recognize those barriers and move past them together and to try and build a more equitable society, right? And it was just a really cool conversation, and she gave a lot of great examples of some of the barriers and problems that women are coming up to specifically in the workplace, but this applies to any minority group or anybody that is being discriminated against, really. And it was just a really cool conversation to be a part of. And I really appreciated Jessica taking the time to come on and do this. I learned a bunch. You guys will definitely learn something coming out of this, especially about the unconscious bias stuff. We all have it. Learning what it is and what yours is can really help you and your team and society succeed. So why not, right? Just, you have to be open and honest about it. It was really cool. So, you guys are going to love this conversation. Jessica's the best. She's so knowledgeable and so humble, and it was just really enjoyable. So, sponsors for 2021, West Fraser is the number one. And without them, I could not do this. They have allowed me to do this the way I want to do it. I couldn't thank them enough. So thank you so much, West Fraser. And also Greenlink Forestry. They've been with me since the beginning, and I can't thank them enough either. It's just been so great and so helpful to have them be a part of this. And thank you so much, Greenlink. And finally, Damage Timber. Damage Timber is a company here out of Edmonton, Alberta, and they go into the bush, into wildfire burn areas, and cut down wildfire burnt trees, turn them into stuff you can put in your kitchen. It's awesome. Like really, really cool stuff. Butcher blocks, cutting boards, charcuterie boards, that kind of stuff. You'll love it. Check them out. damagetimber.com. Put in Your Forest 10 at checkout to get 10% off. So what is your, because Women in Wood is something like a side gig for you, right? What is your main gig right now?
Yeah, so Women in Wood is my side gig. My main gig right now, I work at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and I am the Vice President of Education. So I've been here for about 3 years. And then I also oversee Project Learning Tree, which is our educational program of both the US and Canada.
Yeah, that's right. That's where we first met. I didn't even remember when you mentioned it. I was like, oh, okay, that's who that was. Yes. I remember when you were doing the bike tour.
When the guy was biking across Canada.
Yeah, no, that was pretty cool. Yeah,
it was cool.
Very cool. Actually, you know what? One other thing that we should talk about is, how do you pronounce your last name?
So it's Kaknevicius.
Kaknevicius. I'm glad I got that on
cats
recording.
And fishes. Yeah. So okay. I just tell people cats and fishes, and usually they remember.
Okay, there we go. I just wanted to make sure I got that on recording so I don't screw it up at the intro.
It's all right. I'm used to it.
Okay. I've had a few episodes where I've released intros with people, and I realized afterwards that I said their name wrong. So I try to avoid that now if I can.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So usually I start off with a question of like motivation and why you've gone down, like why forestry and what motivated you to go down that path, and why do you keep doing it? You know, like what makes it worthwhile to you?
Yeah, so I'm probably like many people, which grew up not really realizing that forestry was a place that you could actually work or even really knew what it was. So I grew up outside of Toronto, like in the suburb outside of Toronto. I grew up with like a wooded area behind me, a conservation area, and I spent a lot of time in it, but I never would have considered myself outdoorsy or naturey in any way. We didn't go camping when I was a kid because we had a cottage or a cabin, not even a cabin really, just a cottage. And so I wasn't really an outdoors person, or I didn't see myself as that. I went to school to be a vet. I went to U of T with the intention of moving to University of Guelph after I got my undergrad. And when I was at U of T, I was looking at expanding my course load and not just focusing on like biology and zoology, but looking for an opportunity to kind of broaden just so I could enjoy my schooling. And so I saw forestry in the course book and literally was like, oh, that sounds all right. I'll just sign up and take a few courses. And so it was in my second year that I started taking some courses, and I had Andy Kenny as a professor, and he is a well-known urban forest guy, but he was just such a good prof. And it was so interesting to learn from him what forestry was and the importance of it in Canada. And so I was like, well, this is kind of cool. I want to keep taking courses in this. Why not? I need to broaden my course load. And so I remember in his course, someone came, or he was talking about tree planting. I don't even know how it started. And I was like, oh, I need a summer gig. I'll just go tree planting, make some money. Yeah. Not really realizing kind of what I was signing up for.
Right.
So I went tree planting in Northern Ontario, and it was funny because I'd never camped before, like really camped.
No.
Yeah. I showed up with like a tent and like all my gear, and was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And it's like still at the end of or beginning of May, and so it was kind of wintry, so I was so not prepared for that. But anyway, so I planted for a summer and I made it. and then while I was doing it, I was like, this is kind of interesting. Like, why are we doing this? And that's one thing actually I've always found interesting about the tree planting camps. You don't really learn why. You're just kind of told, okay, here's your trees, here's your plot of land, get it done. And so I walked away going like, why, like, what are we doing this for? And like, what's the point of the checkers? And like, you know, what is the ultimate goal for this? So kind of embodied those thoughts into my courses and my second, third, and going into my fourth year. And then I went back to plant for a second year. It wasn't as fun as the first year. I made it again, but it wasn't as good as the first year and the crew that I was with. So, it was what it was. And so it just kind of expedited my interest in forestry. And honestly, like what really was interesting for me was the opportunities that kept coming up in forestry. And so at U of T, we had, an opportunity to apply for this program called Transfor. And it was a program where you could go across Europe to 4 different countries to learn about sustainable forest management. And then they had a second program that was going across Canada to different provinces to learn about sustainable forest management. So I applied for it while I was at tree planting in my second year, and I got accepted. And so I finished tree planting, came home, packed my bags, and went to Europe for, I think it was 3 weeks. And so we traveled Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Germany. And it was, I'm sorry, not Sweden, Denmark, Wales, Germany, and Finland. And it was really cool. Like, it was just like this, me and 9 other people from different universities across Canada learning about forestry in Europe. And then I was the
totally
only
different world, right?
Totally
like compared to North America. I mean,
so then I came back to Canada for the Canadian program. So I was the only Canadian accepted, and so I was with a bunch of Europeans. And so the intention was to transfer people from Canada to Europe, from Europe to Canada, to learn about different practices. And so I went across Canada to BC, Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick to learn about forestry operations. And all of this was covered for by a grant from the government of Canada. I think I had to pay a few $100 for each one. And I was like, again, it was just like one of those things where it was like, it's a cool opportunity. I wasn't really looking for it, but hey, I'll take it. And it's just things like that kind of kept coming up, like whether it was like going to a conference for free or doing this, or getting like a job with another forestry person. It happened more frequently than my other degree, which was in zoology. It was a bigger class, lots of people. You kind of were one of many. And in forestry, it was like you were one of few. And so the opportunities were more there.
Right.
So yeah, so it just kind of like kept me going. And so, I would then travel after my undergrad. I went to Australia and Asia for 6 months, and then I came back and did my master's of forest conservation. And again, cool opportunity. Got to go to Haida Gwaii for the summer to work, for the government, and, just do an internship there. And, again, a cool opportunity kind of came up. And so I took it. And then after that, I just started volunteering at Forest Ontario, which is a nonprofit in Ontario that focuses on tree planting and education, and spent 9 years there, and then came to SFI. So, it wasn't my intention to end up in forestry, but it kind of just ended up being that way because the opportunities were there. It was really cool. You asked at the beginning, like, what keeps me here? Honestly, it's probably the people. Working at Forest Ontario was so humbling because I got to interact with a lot of people that work on the ground, whether it's with youth or whether it's in the bush operating or whether it's managing or whether it's tree marking. Like, they're just like people that love what they do, and they are so humble, and all they want to do is do good because they want to make sure that the forests are healthy and they're there for future generations. And it's just like I fed off that energy, and I was just like, I love what they love what they do so much, and like, you want to love what you do. And so that's kind of what's kept me here, is just being able to interact with those people that really love their job and do their job because they really believe in what they do.
Yeah, the passion part is a big thing, right? That's awesome. That's a really cool story. I like that. Mm-hmm. Just the it's not often I get that answer, right? Where it's the people and the passion that keeps you in there. That's cool. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So leading into the main reason that we're here talking today, right? The whole idea of equity and diversity in the workplace. What was there a single event, or was there some kind of thing in your career journey that highlighted when you first recognized that something like your gender might play a role in the opportunities or that sort of thing? And how did that lead into the creation of Woman in Wood?
Yeah. So, in my schooling, it was interesting because I remember my undergrad, there was like 4 of us in our final program, and we were all women. So I never saw my gender as something that was an issue in forestry because of the classes I was a part of, the people I was with. It was when I started working in at Forest Ontario, and I would go to events, and I would go and I'd be like, whoa, something doesn't belong here, and it's definitely me. and then that's when I remember I looked across the room and saw someone else like me, and it was a young woman, and I was like, oh, we should talk. And so her and I started chatting, and that's Lacey Rose, and we kind of connected because we were one of the few people in the room that were young and looking to broaden their careers and make those connections, and we didn't really know anybody. And so we just started hanging out and chatting, and we'd hang out with the guys like at the conferences, and they would joke about being part of the boys club, and we would say, we should start our own girls club, right? Like we're like, let's start our own like girls club. And so we just decided to like start something online, this Facebook group. I was like, oh, I should get a logo done by my buddy. And so I was like, hey, like, can you create a logo that like shows empowerment of women in this sector? And he came up with
solid logo, by the way.
Yeah, he came up with this amazing logo, and I was like, awesome. Thinking like we would put it on like a couple t-shirts, it'd be funny, right? And so we started this Facebook group, and then now there's like over 2,300 women from around the world in this Facebook group. And honestly, we thought it would be like 30 people that we maybe knew. And so it's interesting what it's grown into. And I think what's really interesting is it came at a time when people really needed it, but didn't know they needed it. And so this is well before like some of the other initiatives that are out there. And it was one of the first ones that really focused on bringing women together in like a safe space to have conversations around the challenges they're facing, or even just like, look for ideas on gear, look for ideas on how to find a job type of thing. Like it was really just created to just be this grassroots network. And because it was one of the first ones, I think that's why it's so recognized as being important, because it just has this like really grassroots feel. Like it's not an organization. We're not owned by anybody. Nobody dictates what happens with it, but it naturally has turned into this like amazing community of women that help each other. And, there's like, we've sold thousands of t-shirts across the world. And it's like, when you show up at an event and another woman is wearing a shirt with the logo, you kind of drawn to each other, at least start the conversation. And I think it's been interesting when Lacey and I go to events now, and like you see these young women in the audience wearing the shirt, and they're looking at you being like, hey. And I remember being there and being like, oh, there's another old white guy presenting at the conference, right? Like it was tough. So, it ignited out of a need to bring women together, and it's taken on a life of its own. And we're grateful for that.
Yeah. Oh no, it's really cool to see, and I think the name helps too. You get a catchy name that helps.
Yeah.
With the
yeah, exactly. A
hashtags.
Cool logo. Yeah, cool logo, fun name. Like we really wanted it to be fun. We didn't want it to be corporate. We wanted it to be like, you want to be part of this club because hey, it's super cool, right? Like that was really our intention. And so, it's really been interesting to see it grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So as it started to grow, and as you started to like, what kind of discussions? I don't want to like oust whatever you guys are like, whatever kind of is going on there, right? But I just mean to maybe try and shed some light on some of the common issues, some of the common problems that some people aren't aware of, or aren't aware of the the barriers that are unintentionally being created. Can you shed some light on some of the like the more common things that are coming up? And
so our Facebook community of over 2,300, it's only open to women, and we've been very.
I accidentally tried to join, actually.
Yeah, and we declined. Sorry.
I think I did it as the Your Forest podcast, thinking
probably.
Maybe I can get some insight, and then but as I did it, I was like, I think. No.
Yeah. Well, and we get a lot of people. We get organizations, and we get men trying to join, and we do a bit of a screening because, like, we want. I think the advantage has been it does provide that safe space where women can ask those questions that they might not be able to ask if there were men part of the group. And we've been challenged about, well, don't you want men to see the conversations? Yes, but I don't think they would happen if it was open. Some of the basic conversations that happen, like some of the ones where you're like it seems pretty simple, is around gear. So like I'm taller. I don't have an issue with this, but like Lacey is like tiny, and there's lots of women that just don't fit into the right gear, or they don't make gear, or they're getting, I would say the sector is getting a lot better, or people that provide gear to the sector are getting better at understanding that women need different needs. So whether it's like wider hips or different lengths or the right size shoe, like safety is a big issue. I remember talking to this young woman who had just entered arboriculture, very petite, and she couldn't find anything that fit her. And she was like, I literally don't feel safe showing up at my job because my gear doesn't fit. And she's like, I just don't know where to go to get the right gear. And so there's a lot of people that have that issue. And there's constantly conversation, but like, where do I get the right boots? Where do I get the right pants? Where do I get the right,
Oh my
cruising vest that fits me? And so it's something as simple as that. And I know like for some people, it's like, oh, whatever, like your shoe doesn't fit, but it's like, it's this confidence thing, right? You want to show up to your first job. You want to show up to your job being like, the last thing I want to worry about is if my shoe doesn't fit. Like that's like the thing that I shouldn't have to worry about. It's like, can I get my job done? Can I get, I want to be confident. And so it's that's one of the basic conversations that is continually happening. Another one that's been really interesting is around wage gaps. And so, I think that there's this, some people don't understand how women and men perceive job postings or perceive negotiating for themselves. And so there's been studies that show when a man looks at a job posting, they can see 50% that they're qualified for and they apply for it. When a woman looks at a job posting, she'll want to see 100% connection, or a very higher, like higher than a man's percentage that that she's qualified for the position, and then she'll apply for it. And so it's getting over that hurdle of like, when we put job descriptions out there, we're looking for this is our ideal candidate, but in no way do we expect sometimes for people to fit into every single thing that you put on there. You're just looking for some high level things. Well, sometimes women can't overcome that barrier of like even putting themselves out there. So the application process is one part. Then when you actually get the job or offered the job, it's not even just in the poor sector, across any sector, women don't negotiate for what they deserve. Men will always ask for more. Women will kind of settle on lower salaries. And so the conversations in the group, there's been a couple where someone's looking to negotiate with their boss on a raise, and because of the confidence that or questions or the feedback that they got from asking that question in the group, they actually ended up getting like 17% more than they originally thought they were going to get, just because they were like, I'm going to go for it. Like, I didn't think I should, but I'm going to go for it. And then when they did, it was like, wow, that actually worked. And it's like, well, of course, like that's how it works, but you can only like advocate for yourself. You can only be your own cheerleader. So if you're not asking, you're not going to get it. But it's just funny, like it's how something as simple as asking for something is a kind of gendered issue. So there's conversations like that. There's also conversations around sexual harassment and how to deal with like a challenging boss or a challenging workplace, and just the feedback that women will give on like how they've approached the challenge or how they might approach the solution. There's just those like in-depth conversations around what people have done. And I think it's that honest, like, here's what I've done, that I think people really benefit from the group, is hearing from other people's stories. And if it wasn't for the group, I don't know how people would get that information. Like, you might have a one-off conversation with one person here or there, and if they didn't have the same experience as you might not walk away with like the same knowledge or next steps. But because this is like 2,000 women that could potentially like provide feedback onto your challenge, you'll get a diverse set of perspectives and a diverse set of approaches that I think and like empowers you to come to a challenge with like, here's my like toolbox of tools that I can use in this situation, and here's all these things I've learned from people, and I'm going to apply this moving forward. And so it's a huge empowerment community that I think has been more than what Lacey and I expected from it, and what we're humbled by constantly. Like when we first started the group, it was her and I posting once or twice a week, and now it's like we don't even have to do anything, and every day there's multiple conversations happening. And there's also like even just really fun stuff, like someone will find a funny graphic and put it in there, a cool article and share it in there. And then the one last thing that is really powerful in the community is the amount of job postings that are shared. Like, I remember when I was graduating and I was like, where am I going to work? Like, where do I even start? And like, there's some job posting or job boards out there for the sector, but again, like being able to hear from another woman, like, hey, this job might be right for you, and to get all the like tons of job postings every month, and the diversity of them is just like, wow, like I hope that more women are entering the sector just because they're actually being fed these amazing opportunities, and they can reach the person that posted and be like, tell me about the organization you work for, or like, what is it like how do I make sure that I could potentially be successful in this position? And you can have that conversation.
It's exciting to hear that you've had so much success in creating that, that community where women can feel empowered and get some answers that they're otherwise, wouldn't be able to get, right? Because I think it seems like that's true, that there's issues for women in just the workplace in general that like men have no idea even exist,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, who do you ask? And if the majority of your leaders or whatever are men, then like, yeah, how do you go about that? So it's a really cool idea, and I love it. And I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad that you're seeing so much engagement. It's really awesome. So, but like, some of the stuff that you were discussing, that you were talking about as major issues, like it's interesting that so much of it is on a societal level, right? Like it's not even like, you're talking about confidence and that sort of thing. And yeah, like it's not like the forest industry or the workplace is necessarily like stifling confidence, but like the society that you have grown up in hasn't allowed for you to have the same confidence as a male counterpart. And I think those types of like, I think that difference is almost where some of the problem is, that the misunderstanding is, I guess, right?
Yeah, but I will say too, like the sector still totally impacts confidence. Like if you're not creating an inclusive environment for a woman to enter, it's gonna drive people out. And that's what like some research is showing. Like I said, when I graduated from both my undergrad and my master's, there was many women in my program. And so I never saw it as a challenge, but the challenge has been women staying in forestry or women staying in the sector. And that often relates to the inclusivity of the environment, or the way that the in sector works and whether it supports them in their life goals. And I think that is something that this is, again, it might not be a sector specific thing, but the sector definitely needs to catch up on how it supports women. And like one of the basic things that I always think about is, if you're a male manager, or if you're a male in a leadership position, even if you're a female in a leadership position, I have to be very mindful of this when I'm leading my own team. Are you providing equitable opportunities for your team? And so whether it's, training, whether it's advancement, whether it's, providing feedback, are you providing the same feedback, or do you provide different feedback and different opportunities because of their gender without even realizing it? And so, it's one of those, like, it's a very simple thing to think about, but it has huge implications on the trajectory of women's career paths. If you're not providing those same growth opportunities, then they're never going to grow into leadership positions. And so, as simple as like a training course, or as simple as having a conversation around, like, I remember watching this really interesting TED Talk a couple of years ago, and I took it and internalized this knowledge. But for me, the TED Talk was talking about women and how to be successful in your career. And they were saying, one of the things that women are taught as they grow into their careers is to focus on their soft skills. How do I communicate? How do I network? How do I find a mentor? And those skills are extremely important. But where the difference was that men were being taught, how do I run a business? How do I look at the financials? How do I make sure that this is a sustainable company or organization? And just even that basic thing will lead to different growth in different people. Like, you can mentor as long as you want, but if you don't know the business side of an organization, you might not raise into that senior leadership role. And so I remember when I heard that TED Talk, I internalized that and said, I got to start learning how to read financials. I got to start learning like what it means to run through a GL and P&L, and then just be like, like understand that really basic thing, because it's huge for my growth. And that's, I think, what has led to part of my success, is being able to talk numbers in a big conversation. And that adds a level of credibility. And sometimes women aren't given that opportunity to learn that. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like, it seems like for me as a male who's not like, I don't see these issues, right? They're completely blind to me, but I want to be part of the solution, right? I want to be inclusive, and I want to try and promote equity in whatever way I can. But so like for both men and women, what advice do you have for people to, like, how do we start to suss out these issues that exist? Like, how do you, in a workplace, let's say you're an employee and you want to start a more intense equity campaign kind of and understanding campaign within your workplace, how do you go about starting that?
Yeah. And I would say, like, I probably don't have all the answers, but I think one of the basic things is sometimes to actually like step back and be a bit more humble, and realizing that you might not know everything, and you might not realize that you have some of these unconscious biases, and that, you don't just because you're a male doesn't mean that by having women in the workplace, you understand what it's like to be a woman. And so it's actually asking people more of what do they need and getting feedback from your employees to be like, how can we make this more inclusive for you, whether it's to advance your career or retain you in the workforce. Sometimes I think it's actually just asking that information. And I remember, so I just came back from mat leave, and one of the things that I read while I was off mat leave was, transitioning back into the workplace after mat leave. And it's not about like, here's your plan. It's actually talking to the mother who's coming back to the workplace, being like, how can we support you? Like, what does it look like for this to be an important and inclusive environment for you as a new person or as a new mom or as a new dad coming back? Like, actually having those conversations on an individual basis is really important, because one solution isn't going to work for everybody necessarily, but it's identifying that, putting that into your corporate culture, and then being humble and saying, we don't necessarily know everything. Let's bring in the people that do. Let's, if we're going to tackle this issue, let's ensure that we're including the people, whether it's women, whether it's Indigenous, whether it's, Black people. Like, let's make sure that they're part of those conversations when you're trying to develop your DEI and your diversity in your organization. Because you, like my colleague, and I really love this saying, he's like, you can't do it for us without us. And I think that that's really important for anything related to DEI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. That makes sense. Like, so it's just literally just asking, what do you need?
Yeah, or it's asking what are the challenges, or why do you think that you might be facing barriers, or what are the barriers that you're facing? Like, my situation might not be the same as another new mom entering back in after mat leave, right? But like, if I'm asked and saying like, how do we be supportive of you? Like, what do you need? I think that goes a long way to retaining people in the workplace, to feel like they matter, and what works for them matters to the organization.
Right. So I'm not sure, like, how much resistance do you see, or do you imagine, like maybe even just through Women in Wood, right? How much resistance to these types of ideas is there in the workplace? Because I mean, like, everybody wants to be, well, I would assume, I don't know, most people want to be inclusive. They want to be part of the solution. They want to be helpful. But then when they're faced with something like this, like, I mean, how much susceptibility is there to these ideas of having a leader, like a CEO or whatever, actually be not susceptible, to be
like open to it.
Open to these conversations, because having this honest conversation is a lot of times in business is not really happening. Everything's supposed to be professional and corporate, and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I think that we're at a point where it's like, it's no longer like you can just have like a checkbox and you've checked the box. I think we're at a point in like,
that's a major problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're at a point in society where it's like, are you being honest with how you're doing things, or are you just doing it to do it? And I think we're at a turning point where you can't ignore it. You can't ignore that diversity in the sector is important. There's no longer, like, you can't be that organization that's like, no, we don't have a DI policy. No, we're not doing things to support diversity. Like, you're going to be left behind. Like, consumers are not going to support you. Suppliers are not going to work with you. You're not going to be seen as a good company. And so people are realizing, like, we have to do something. And like, what does that something look like? And so I think leadership and good leaders will recognize that it has to be something that's meaningful and engaging. And so I'm hopeful that it's no longer just going to be a nice to have. It's like a requirement. And, people are getting also, like, I always say this to young people when they're like applying for a position and they're so worried. And actually, I was just having this conversation with my partner a couple of weeks ago when he was doing a job interview. And I said to him, like, as much as like you are looking for a job, you also have to like think about the company you want to work for, and like, are they reflective of your values? So go look at like who they are, ask them about who they are and how, like, what kind of environment they provide, because you're selecting them just as much as they're selecting you. And so I think that that's really important for organizations to think about, corporations to think about, is that it's no longer a one-sided transaction, or people are going to leave, or people are not going to join your organization if you're not doing something to support an inclusive environment.
Absolutely. No, you're totally right. Like, I know, I feel like kind of our generation is one of the first generations that's been like, with the internet and all that kind of stuff, we've been able to recognize that more fulfillment value in the workplace, and how we want to do something that is important to us and that we feel matters, and that you want your workplace to be an inclusive environment and supportive and all those types of things. And yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of that old school mentality that some employers have of just, you should be thankful to have a job.
Yeah.
Right?
And like, let's be honest, like social media could ruin you as an organization if you're not doing something. And so something as simple as a bad experience from an employee could ruin you. And so you have to kind of already be thinking like, well, I don't want to do this to avoid that. I want to do this to make sure that I'm a good organization that people will be proud of. Like, I'd want someone to post how proud they are to work at where I work, because we did create an inclusive and a welcoming environment. And so, you can, again, it's not something you can ignore anymore.
No. And even from a business standpoint, a strictly like financial business standpoint, the research is just insane out there right now, saying that like more inclusive places, more diverse places do better, period. Yeah. Like, it's not, you can't argue against that anymore. It's like there's the old argument of, oh, we only hire the best candidate. And it's just that in and of itself is offensive to, you know what I mean, to the minorities, right? To women. And so it's because it just kind of assumes like, well, you're not going to be the best candidate. So it's interesting that, now you can't argue it anymore, right? Like diversity is a must for all reasons. Oh, there goes my dog.
Yeah,
of course. Always.
And like it was, so we had an event a couple of weeks ago for my work online, and we had someone attend who was deaf, and so we had closed captioning and all that stuff. But it was interesting because we were talking about job postings, and she was like, I get intimidated when I look at a job posting and it says like excellent verbal communication, and I was like, wow, I never thought about that. I didn't even think that a word like verbal in a job posting could be so intimidating for somebody. And so sometimes you have to think of like, how are you reflecting yourself as an organization and asking people to apply to something if you're almost creating this unintended barrier or this like bias that you're again, you don't realize, like unconscious bias of like developing a job description, but having to look at that and say like, are the words inclusive? Are we being restrictive in who could apply? Like those types of things I think are becoming more aware for employers when they're looking to hire or advance people, is the opportunities you're providing and what limitations it could have on how you advance people or who you're hiring.
Right, absolutely. One of the next things I wanted to ask you was actually discussing, like, it seems like the problem could be solved with people understanding their unconscious bias and making it personal, right? Like, so having men start to understand these issues and to make it personal to them and not just something that they conceptually understand. So how do we start to bridge that gap, do you think?
Yeah, and I would say, like, I know that we talk a lot about like men understanding, but I do think that there's also like women that need to understand whether they have it. And so I've run into situations before where I have to stop myself and think like, how am I giving equitable advice and opportunities to my employees regardless of their gender or regardless of their background or regardless of their ethnicity. And I think sometimes you just have to think about that. And so I don't want to focus necessarily on just making it a man issue, but more around how do we be more reflective in society to think about things. And I think unconscious bias is a big one, and it doesn't, it can be very uncomfortable for you to explore your unconscious bias or for you to think about these things that you don't necessarily even realize are in your background because of your history, or because of the things that you've been taught, or because of the knowledge. Like, I come from an Eastern European family. I'm like 1.5 generations in Canada. And, sometimes having conversations with them can be difficult around diversity because they see it differently and they grew up differently. And for me, it's like, I think it's recognizing and being, I guess, humbled again is one of those things. Like, you're not fully knowledgeable at any point, and you might not. It's a growth, and it's an opportunity for you to learn and continue learning, and you never stop learning about the different challenges that people face. And I think society is showing us that. Like, just constantly there's different issues in the media, and then you have to think about it and be like, well, how have I interacted with that audience before? Or what are some of the assumptions I've had about that audience before? What are some of the things I may have said in the past that I wasn't necessarily thinking was an issue then? And now it's like, you know what, maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. Or like, you know, as anybody, as a leader in an organization, just being very humbled and reflective of who you are, and being open to the fact that you're not perfect, I think is very tough for some people. It can be tougher for people that are later in their careers, or people that are in really high leadership positions, or, you know, people that have made it this far in their career because they haven't had to worry about it, and now they do. And so, I think it's just being honest with yourself and being open with yourself is extremely important. Yeah. And so integrating that into your culture too, like into your organization, saying like, being like, I'm still learning. I hope that you will learn with me, and let's learn about this together. Let's talk about gender in the workplace. Let's talk about diversity in the workplace. Let's support Indigenous people in this country. What does that look like? And being that leader from above, I think, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like the leadership is crucial. And I read an article a little while back, by, I think it was Harvard Business Bureau, called Lean into the Uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that?
No, but I've heard about like various versions of that. Like you think about like your comfort zone, and the only way you ever learn is if you get outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, and it was talking a lot about leaders that are afraid to open up and be honest. They're afraid to say something wrong and then be seen as the bad guy or whatever. And I think what you're saying is great, because you're saying like, hey, I think everyone recognizes that no one's perfect and there's room to grow. And so the leaders, like, nothing's going to change unless the leaders in the organization are going to take the first steps and be vulnerable and try to open up.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, as a leader, I have to show that to my employees. And so sometimes if it's like, if I don't know how to say something, or I don't know how to address something, I'll be like, sorry, I'm not knowledgeable in this. Please educate me as I talk about this. And like, am I saying in the right way? Would you have any recommendations on how I might approach this topic? It's being honest with that. And I think it's been interesting for me over my career to interact with like younger people in the workplace. And there's this I know everything attitude, and I have nothing to learn. And I think if I can give one piece of advice to someone who's younger, is you are never not learning, and don't ever think that you've got all the knowledge. And so whether it's young or old, like, I think we all have to be like accepting of the fact that things change, and we have to adapt, and we have to learn to keep up with the change. And so it happens in the diversity place. That happens in a lot of places in the work.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just interesting that you get this came up quite a bit in the last few podcasts that I've done, is that idea that, you know, a good leader knows everything and has all the answers. And that's not what a leader's supposed to be, right? A leader's supposed to be somebody that just can help the collaboration move forward and get past problems, not necessarily have the answers. And I think that's where the idea of leadership is changing.
Yeah, like the idea that a good leader is someone who actually lets other people draw on their successes and their knowledge and bring that forward. And, you know, a good leader brings that out of somebody.
Yeah, exactly. A good leader allows that person to grow and improve, and doesn't stifle it because out of fear or whatever, or out of perception of ego that they might have or something like that, right? And it's been a common theme in this kind of year of podcasts. Just people need to kind of check your egos, and just it's okay to be wrong sometimes. It's okay to be vulnerable, and I think it's crucial to just the success of everybody, really. Yeah.
And I would say it's been interesting for me to identify like my leadership style over the past little bit. And like, I'm not into one of those people that understands like the titles of different leaders. Like, I've had some interviews with people where they're like, I'm a servant leader. I don't know if that's what I am, but what I would say is like, I'm a pretty relaxed leader that hopes that I can elevate the people on my team versus me being always the one that's coming up with the ideas or speaking. Like, I think that's the benefit I brought. And I think that that helps with supporting women in the workplace, or supporting anybody in the workplace, is giving them a voice. And, you know, when we think about, I remember, so here's a kind of a tip for for people in the workplace to support more women. Like something as basic as we used to, like, I remember going to meetings and I might be the only woman in the room. And it was like, oh, who's going to take minutes? And they would all look at you and you're like, I guess I'm taking minutes. And a simple thing like that, like you don't realize that usually it's the woman that puts up her hand or is asked to do something, or like your Christmas party. Are you always going to the woman to organize the Christmas party? Because like, that's the role that you've assumed that they have. And like, it sometimes is very simple things like that, or not allowing them to speak. So I've been to many boardroom tables or many meetings with, you know, high level senior people where they took up a lot of space and you didn't have that space or that opportunity to speak. And it was like one or two people in that room would recognize, like, she just needs an opportunity. And like, they would be like, hey, Jess, do you have something? I'm like, yeah. But it's like, when you're young in your career and you're like, I'm nervous about speaking up, or like there's this person that's speaking again for the next time. Like, how do I take up that space? It's having that honest conversation, like with someone and saying, can you help me find room? Or as a person, as a leader, you recognize like this person just needs an open space to talk, and providing that space can be really important.
Right. Not everybody is so confident that they'll just jump in front of a group of people and start saying what they think, right? They need to be given opportunity. Makes sense.
Yeah. And that was something I recognized a lot in the sector when I was early in my career. Was like, it was tough to be one of the only women in the room and have a voice. And it was like some people in the room just helped me find that voice and gave me that confidence to speak up more and more.
So just being more like, people should be more empathetic and more thoughtful of the other people in the room, and notice when maybe they're being quiet or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And also like, I recognize that like that might have worked for me. This goes back to like that understanding how people communicate. I think we're all kind of aware, like everyone communicates differently now. Some people are more introverts who don't necessarily speak up in a group. So understanding how your employees function the best, or how they communicate the best, and being able to elevate that. So maybe it's not in a meeting. Maybe it's after saying, hey, like sending a note around being like, hey, if you weren't able to provide feedback, let me know, because they're more comfortable in writing, or a one-off conversation, right? Like it's understanding how, like, who your employees are, how they operate, and being able to elevate that to get the best out of them.
Yeah, that's something that's interesting. Like, I know my understanding of First Nations culture in a lot of places is also that like they don't interrupt a lot of times, right? Like they wait their turn and they speak their thing, and if you don't give them an opportunity to speak, they're not going to do that because it's seen as rude. And just because they didn't speak up doesn't mean they didn't have ideas or thoughts. It means they were taking their time to think about it and to come up with something meaningful. And yeah, the only way you're going to get that answer out of them is by giving them the opportunity, or like you said afterwards. Some introverts, don't want to do that. They're never going to speak up, but they have ideas that can be helpful, right? So there was something else I wanted to get to. You mentioned the thing about kind of being given the traditional role of like taking notes or planning the party or whatever. And yeah, I did some earlier episodes when I first started doing the podcast, trying to do like the women in forestry kind of thing, and my guest did a great job. I did a piss poor job of navigating it and trying to understand. I think I found my voice a little better and a little more confident. And one of the things that I've been speaking to more people afterwards is that they've been given like jobs like they'll have the same, there'll be four other people in the room, all men. They'll all have the same job position, all the same seniority, all that kind of stuff. But the woman will always be given the, hey, can you like book me a hotel, or can you do this, like all the clerk stuff, right? But they never going to point it out, because if they do, they're going to see it as not a team player or something like that. And then the other thing that came up was also there's the challenges that I've been understanding with women in the workplace is that, like you're saying, they don't speak up, so they have to be more aggressive. And then when they go too much, then they're seen as too aggressive, and it's like there's no winning situation there, right? And so it's a problem that men don't really have to deal with, but it's something that like women are almost forced to like thread the needle in that situation. Like you have to be perfect, otherwise you're going to be like, called something or whatever.
Yeah. And like, so I don't know if you saw that campaign that came out of Tolko last year that was focused on like it was Tolko and Ecom, I think, around like the words that describe women versus men. And like, I'm trying to find it right now. I can't find it, but it's like when a woman is described as aggressive or assertive, a man is described as like a leader. Like there's like different ways, even though the way that they're displaying themselves are the same, the way that they're described to others is different. And it was interesting. Like,
and I just did that.
And it's again, but that's unconscious, right? Like that's one of those things where like, and then sometimes, and I do it all the time too, where I use a word and I'm like, oh, that was probably not the right word. And I think part of like learning is being able to recognize that and be like, oh yeah, maybe I should think about that next time. And then you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to do everything perfectly, but in order to like at least recognize like, hey, whoops, I made that slip. How do I make sure that I can think about that in the future and do things differently? I think that's where, that's where I think women just want the sector to think about like, what can we do to support more women? And the fact that we're even having the conversation, I think, is part of it. And I think women are feeling more proud and more encouraged because the conversation is at least happening now. And like, I run into a lot of women who have been in the sector for decades, and some of them say, we've been having these conversations for decades and we're still here. And some of them say, thank God it's getting to this point where it's like, it's no longer that it's just me and someone else. It's a lot of people that are raising their voices. And so I think that there's a lot of promise for more women staying in the sector and feeling empowered to grow into leadership positions.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that was something where I failed in last time I did this type of a podcast was I said, oh yeah, like there's been a lot of progress. We're doing good. And I think I did say like, oh, there's still work to do, but I think I minimized it a little bit out of the fear of like backlash from industry or something like that. Right. Like I wanted to be, because I was supported by industry, right. Or still am. But I've since realized that no, they want to be part of the solution as well. And that so trying to have this conversation honestly and honest with myself, and just trying to, just trying to check that unconscious bias. And that, is there like resources you can push people towards? Like if someone wanted to maybe incorporate like an unconscious bias training into their workplace, or is there like a list of questions that you think are good for leaders to ask their employees that aren't going to, it's not just like, hey, how do we move the needle on diversity? Kind of like actual real questions, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's resources out there. Like I haven't found a really quality training resource. I would say there's different quizzes you can take to figure out if you have unconscious bias. Like we did some diversity training at our organization a couple summers ago, and there's some like very uncomfortable situations that you have to put yourself into actually for you to recognize that you might have an unconscious bias. So it's whether it's showing images or saying words, and how do you respond to those? It's interesting to go through that process because you don't realize how you might be associating certain people with certain characteristics until you go through that process. And so that internal kind of DEI training is really valuable. And so I would just encourage people to find something locally that might work, or reach out to other people in the sector, other people in your communities to say like, what has been successful for you? Because I haven't yet to find one that's been like the golden star, but I will say that there's programs out there and there's online things you can do, but it doesn't mean anything if not everyone's doing it. And so I think there's even, we did like an online quiz or like a survey before our actual DEI training. And it kind of outputted like, here's who you are and here's where your biases are. Or here's how like, it's interesting to like get a reflection of yourself and you're like, okay, well, at least I'm good at that. And you're like, oh, I kind of missed that one.
I wonder how many people rejected that outright and just like, no, that's not me. That's the way it was worded and that kind of thing.
And I think, again, it comes back to like being humble. If you get like a bad report, it's not like, well, I'm going to do the quiz again to see if I did better. It's like, oh, okay, I might not be realizing that I'm a little bit, I'm gapping in some of these areas where I'm not even thinking about it. Yeah, just like I would just encourage anybody to make it part of your culture, to integrate it into the work you do. But as a leader, just like recognize that like you kind of have to reflect what you want from an organization. Yeah,
you're the leader, right? Yeah. No one's going to do anything without your lead. Yeah. Like you are the leader. Without you doing it, no one's going to do it. And no one's going to, it's very unlikely that somebody somebody like one of your employees is going to take up the lead on that because they don't know that you're going to support it, right? And they have to put themselves out there just to bring it up, right? Because you might, and so, and I think it's important to point out that nobody doesn't have unconscious bias. Like that's, everybody has that period, and we always
that's why
will.
It's unconscious, right? Like you don't know it.
Exactly, and it probably changes with time, but it's exactly. It's interesting that as time goes on, I've realized in my own personal life, kind of that it's like being humble means more than just taking things in stride. It means actually reflecting on what you think and why you think it, and being honest with yourself, and being willing to take criticism and not getting, offended and heated in a conversation. Just being able to, like, I feel like to me, the most delicate people are the people that can't take criticism, right? You can't take someone saying that, oh, well, I think you're wrong, and they just lose it and they can't handle it, right? And there's a lot of leaders like that out there that just, quote unquote leaders. They're not real leaders; they're just bosses or whatever. So I think it's important to point out that everyone going into like unconscious bias training or diversity training, you're going to learn some stuff about yourself that you're not going to like, and you have to be ready for that and willing to accept it as truth and reflect on it and see what you can do to change that.
Yeah, and I think that some people run into the challenge, like you said, like they're not going to like what they see, or they might, like, you might have people in your workplace that are just like, this is dumb. I can't believe we're doing this. I'm fine, right? And I think that that's really important to reflect on too. If you have people like that, you need to like communicate to them, like, here's why we're doing this, and here's why it's valuable for the company to ensure that we're supporting everybody in the workplace, and here's the benefit to you as a person. I think that that's really important, because I think that like not everyone is going to be into it, or not everyone's going to think that they need to do the work right now. Like there's a range of people that are open to those learning opportunities. And so, like I remember I went to a residential school a couple of years ago that was converted into like a resort. I was actually hosting a conference, and that was the first time that I really, really understood what a residential school was and what happened. And I remember just thinking, like, I'm so humbled in the fact that A, I get to be here and learn this, and B, I feel bad that I don't know enough. And it's like, and then being able to share that. And so I came home, I remember telling like my partner, and I remember telling like my parents, like being like, this experience, like, how come we didn't know about this? And it's like, just being able to have those conversations and be honest and open, I think is really important. And then sharing what you've learned with others, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, like, one of the worst unconscious biases that we have is to try and defend ourselves, to try and defend our psyche and our ego immediately in a conversation, right? When someone says something that may shine on us or our ancestors or whatever in a negative light, our immediate reaction is to defend. And I think we need to, and I'm not a psychologist, my wife is, maybe I should get her on here to talk about this. But I think one of the things that's probably really helpful is for people, whenever you have a negative emotional reaction to something, to recognize that in yourself and ask yourself why, because there's something going on there, that there's something hidden that might help you grow as a human being and become a better person, really, right? And that speaks true to the residential school stuff too, right? Like up until very recently, when you brought up residential schools, it was passed off as, oh, well, whatever, right? Like it was kind of, it wasn't that bad and blah, 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 blah. And now that the truth is out and it's being talked about more and more, it's impossible to ignore, like, right? And so people are starting to come to terms with it and starting to realize that this isn't a reflection on you. This is just a reflection on our society, and that we need to be able to accept this as a mistake and a problem and a real issue that requires action.
And I think for myself, whether it's because of gender or if it's because of ethnicity, like being able to challenge people a bit, I think that can be really important for their own learning. And so for myself, like whether it's speaking with family members or friends, if things are said that make me uncomfortable, I think in the past it was like, oh, I'm brushing it off because that's what that person, that's what they're like. And now it's like, nah, you know what? I'm gonna challenge them a bit on that one because I don't agree with what they're saying, and I don't think it's a right perception to put out there or right thoughts that someone should be thinking. And just being able to challenge it, I think, a bit more is interesting. And that's the same with with women. Like back when I was early in my career, if you would show up at an event and, someone would say something to you, because you're a woman, like you might play it off like, oh, that's just how that guy is. Like he's been in the sector for a long time. That's just how he talks to women. And then getting to the point where it's like, you can actually say like, hey, like, you shouldn't be talking to women like that. Like that's not really respectful. I think it takes a lot of growth to get there, but I think we're at the point where, it's no longer acceptable that that's just how somebody is. And that's just the character that they are, and just brush it off. Like, it's no big deal.
Learn.
Yeah, or even just like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. That's Joe. Joe's like that. You're like, well, maybe Joe shouldn't be like that, and like Joe's not going to know to change unless I say something. So, hey, Joe.
Exactly. I imagine if Joe knew
and Joe's nobody, by the way.
Yeah, Joe's nobody. But I imagine if this theoretical Joe knew that he was being seen in a negative light by people, he would probably want to know and be able to change, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just providing that opportunity. And like, yeah, there's always going to be people that we disagree with in life, but I think, yeah, like you said, we can't just accept the fact that there's discrimination and just be like, oh, well, that's just the way that person is. But like, well, that's just normalizing it. That's not good. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do.
And I think that it takes a lot for like, and I would say this to like men in the sector or to other women in the sector. Mm-hmm. When you hear something in a room or at a meeting that is inappropriate, and whether it's for women or whether it's for other people of color or indigenous people, if there's something that's not right, like I think you have to be able to say something at this point, or you have to be able to say like, hey, like we shouldn't be saying that, or we shouldn't be talking about that. Or like, I remember at one point early in my career, you would go to a mill, and when you go to the mill, you'd always have that calendar in the wood shop, and the calendar was like of women, right? In bikinis or whatever. And like at first it was like, hey, that's funny. And then it was like, hey, like that, that's insulting. And so it was like being able to say that, like, that ain't right. And it was it was interesting.
Yeah, I would ask people to imagine that you had a female boss, and every time you walked into her office, she had like a giant like naked dudes calendar, and you had to stare at that while you had meetings. Like, it's not going to fly. It's not appropriate.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying for sure. Yeah, this whole concept of trying to like move things forward and become more equitable. Like, I think everyone wants to be a part of this solution, or most people want to be. But the challenge is trying to get people to recognize their own faults and how they can improve on them, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. And there's not going to be like one course you can take and then everything's good, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a continuous, and I think that's what's really unique about the forest sector. Like we all believe in adapted forest management. We all believe that as we learn more, we change our practices and we become more sustainable because we're learning along in the process. Like that's how we should be approaching this. It's adaptable DEI. Like it's adaptable because as we learn, we're making sure it's integrated into the work that we're doing. Like we're already doing in the forest sector. It should not be difficult for us to integrate this as part of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. It's just I think it gets to be, it's confusing for people, right? Like you almost need to demystify the idea of equity and diversity. It's, you know what I mean? The words I think people are on board with, and it's just, they're not really sure where to begin. So, but the truth is it's not easy. It's going to take time. It takes personal work. It's not just something you can put on your mission statement and be like, yeah, we stand for this. And you know what I mean? Like you need to do personal work on this in order for it to be a professional realization, right? It can't just be something that it's an entire life changing thing to try and be more inclusive. Yeah,
exactly. And it's something that you have to ask yourself in an organization, like, why do we want this to be a part of who we are? And if it's simply because we want to put it in our statement on our website, well, then you're going to do the work to do that, right? Like if you want to be more inclusive, you have to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's something like for another example, I wanted to bring about, because you just got back from mat leave a few months ago, correct?
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you about how do you think that, reduced your, or no, not reduced, but how do you think it changed your opportunity or your confidence levels, and how do you think that would have differed from like like a male coming back, or someone who didn't just have a baby but was taking parental leave coming back? And I just wanted to start to discuss, because I was listening to a podcast a little while ago where these women were talking about they're in interviews and they didn't want to disclose the fact that they have children because they didn't want to be seen as unreliable, or they're going to have to go pick up their kids, or they're going to be late because of this. And so, but men have no problem. The research was showing this is all in I think it was in the Lean In group, I think, and they released this, and how men are not afraid to release like their personal information and that kind of stuff, whereas women have to safeguard that because they might be seen as unreliable or something like that. So I just wanted to ask you how mat leave, how it changed the way you thought about the workplace and inclusivity.
Yeah. And so, I did a lot of work before I went on mat leave, because I was always like, how is this going to impact my career? Like I was very career focused in terms of like, I've never had I want to be this, but I was like, I'm driven by my career. I'm proud of the work that I do, and it's a part of who I am. And so when I went on mat leave, I was like, is this going to impact me? And so, I remember getting a book, I got a book from my partner. He gave it to me for Christmas, and it was, how to do it all type of thing. And it was being more efficient with your time. And I remember laughing, reading and going, I think as a mom, you do become more efficient with your time. And like those 15 minutes that you do have, you power through things, versus before when it was like, I could take my time, or I have a bit of a break here. It's like, you're just powering through. So, that one I really internalized and tried to be more conscious of my time and being more efficient with it. But I think so I'm part of this group called, Moms at Work on Facebook, and it's not at all sector specific. It's just for moms that are at work now or returning to work or going off on mat leave or whatever. And there's a lot of conversation in that group around, what do you do when you put on your resume, like you had 3 years off, like what do you put? And some people are like, put that you're a mom. Like, why not? Like, this was like an important part of your life, an important part of your career. And so I think that we're moving in a direction where people feel more confident, because you have a lot of skills being a mom. You have like an efficiency thing, you have a caring thing, you have a different approach to the work that you do. Recently I was reviewing my partner's resume, and he actually put, because he's on, we split our parental leave. He actually put on his resume, like on parental leave as like this gap. And it wasn't even really a gap. It was just on parental leave. And I was like, I'm glad that he feels proud enough to put that on there, because it is an important part of who you are. And not to say that parents are better workers than anybody. That's not all what I'm saying. It's just, it's a part of your life, and you should be able to own it and be proud of it. I think the challenge has been for me coming back from mat leave is societal pressure of having like a senior leadership role and being able to be a mom at the same time. And so there's this expectation that like, mom's the one that's going to take care of things, or mom's the one that's going to like, why are you working so long? You're a mom, like you got to go be a mom. And it's like, well, I work long because I have a great partner who can support and is there to be a parent. My grandmother actually said the other week, she's like, oh, he's babysitting while you're working. And I was like, no, he's just being a parent. Like that's what he's doing. Right. But she doesn't get it because she comes from like old school mentality. And so it's being able to say like, yeah, like I have an important role. I have a senior leadership role. And sometimes it requires more time. And like, if I was a man, I bet nobody would ask me why I'm like working late. Or I bet nobody would ask me why I have to take an extra hour here or there to finish something. Like it's this expectation from society that I think is a bit interesting for me that I've recognized. But I've been sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just along that lines, I was going to ask you, do you feel judged by people? Do you feel like people think that you're like a bad mother or something like that because you're working so much? I don't think I feel judged. I think I just feel like I put on this like personal expectation to be everything, which is kind of who I am anyways, but now it's like to a whole new level, like with a kid. And so maybe not judged, but just like you get comments here and there of like, oh, I noticed that you're working late. It's
like, well, like for me, I have a very important like time of the day where I call it like my family time, and I make sure that I generally don't schedule things during that time. And my workplace is very supportive of that. But that means sometimes when he goes to bed, I have to go hop on for an hour and finish something, right? Like that's just how my life works. And that I'm accepting of that. It doesn't bother me, but it bothers some other people sometimes that it's like, oh, she's working later. Oh, like she's a mom, yet she has to work so long, or, so I think it's just been interesting. But I'm like lucky in that like my work was very supportive. When I told them, like they were super happy for me. And B, when I came back, like I think one of the things that some employers don't realize, for whether it's pat leave or mat leave, you have to treat your employees coming back as if they're coming back, or as if they're joining the organization. So onboarding process. And I think that was something that I really valued with my return, was they scheduled time for me to catch up. And it wasn't like a plan and like, here, you're going to talk to this person, you're going to get caught up on this, here's some time for you to review this, here are some important documents that you want to get caught up on. And I remember reading before I went off, like I read this whole guide on like maternity leave. And the onboarding process can be, if it's missing, imagine just coming back to work and opening your email and seeing thousands of emails and not knowing where to start, right? Like if you were an employee on day one and that happened, like you'd be so overwhelmed. So it's the same for any parent going back to work. So I think having
That's a good point.
I think having an onboarding process and onboarding time and being flexible, that they're not going to be up to speed in 2 weeks. And, it might take a month for them to really get caught up and like being able to contribute, I think is really important for employers to consider for any parent.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I never really considered that the onboarding time thing. That totally makes sense. Yeah. Because this person, although it's like somebody that knows their job, but yeah, they've been gone for 6 months or a year or whatever it is. And like, they're going to need time to catch up again.
There's new people that are probably a part of the organization. There's things that have happened that like when I was on mat leave, no, I wasn't reading everything that my company was doing. I was trying to enjoy my mat leave during a pandemic. So it's like, it's just, it's important to provide that support for your people that are coming back from any leave, whether it's sick leave, family leave that they just needed for their own mental health. Like treat them like they are coming back after a long leave, like they're a new employee, and just give them time to catch up.
Yeah, for sure. Do you kind of shifting gears a little bit again? We discussed a little bit about how like men or might have kind of like rose-colored glasses on a little bit and may think that we're a little bit more ahead than we are. How do you think we tackle that kind of thing? Like, you know what I mean? Just people thinking that like, oh, we're good, like we're inclusive, we have lots of women, and it's like there's no worries.
I almost want to challenge other employees who might think otherwise to speak up. And so whether it's other women or other men, like if your leadership is indicating that you're further ahead than you actually feel like they might be, I think it's important for people to bring that up and say, hey, I think we could do more work in this, or hey, we're not perfect. Listen, but come with like evidence, or not evidence, but come with like a case for why it's something to consider. I think that's really important. Like being able to say like, you're not being supportive of women in the workplace, and here's why, and here's some solutions. I think is really important. So I challenge people, whether it's women or men within their companies, to push a little bit. And that'll show your leadership in order to be able to not question, but provide solutions for a company.
Mm-hmm. It's a difficult thing to find in a company, though, right? Like, I don't think it's normal. Like, I think it's becoming more normalized. I gather, but I don't think it's normal to go into a company and see this openness and this willingness to discuss the very honest and very difficult, have the really difficult conversations, right? So
and I think you can find your champion, right? Like maybe it's not the CEO you can go to, but there's a champion who has that strong connection that you can say, hey, like I was thinking this, who can feed that into their thinking or can be that voice for you if you can't necessarily have that connection, and help elevate your thoughts and or bring you into the conversation. I think like find your champion that you can piggyback off of. Yeah,
absolutely. What do you think is the problem with underrepresentation in a company? Like, can you break down just like the nitty gritty of not just for, underrepresentation of women, but like people of color or whatever. Like, could you make a business case for that kind of thing?
Yeah, like I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but there's a lot of stats out there that say how good it is for your business to have different perspectives, and I think that's something that's really important for companies to realize is like you're only going to come up with unique solutions if you bring in unique perspectives into the organization. Yeah, and so I would just challenge them. I mean, you can Google it and just say diversity in business, and I think that you'll find a lot of articles now that can back that up and say why having diverse people in your workplace is beneficial for business. And so whether it's diverse perspectives, ideas, or whether it's providing more, people will see you as a company they want to work with because you're providing that inclusive environment. So it'll create more business opportunities for you. I think that the research is out there to support that. And so if you're someone in your organization that feels like they need to show that in order to change it at leadership, I always say if you want to create change, like come with a business case of like why this might matter to them. And you're more likely to create change when you create a business case. And that's kind of goes back to like what I said earlier, which is most time women are not encouraged to develop those business skills. And so presenting that can be really important for both women and men to drive change in the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's kind of come to the end of my, what I've got written down and my thoughts on this subject, but I want to give you an opportunity to discuss, like, is there anything that you think is important to discuss? Any concepts that we haven't gotten to? I mean, there's obviously there's lots and lots to talk about with this issue, but is there anything important to you right now or specific that you think that we should put out there?
I think for me, I think my career path is a lot different than other women in the sector, and so I would kind of emphasize that. Like for me, I didn't have many challenges that I could say my gender created for me, and that just might be because of where I am in the sector. So I've been more on the education side, more on the conservation side, more on the nonprofit side, where there is generally more women,
Sure.
whether it's in leadership or in the organization overall. So I think sometimes I don't want to cast this perception that there's not challenges faced by women, because I feel like all the time when I read stuff that's happening in our Facebook group, I'm surprised that sometimes things are still happening, but I'm also I'm educated that, you know, there's still work to be done, and that there are still people out there that face like discrimination or face a challenging workplace or don't feel supported because they are a new parent or don't feel like they're advancing in their company because they're not being given those opportunities. I've just been fortunate that I haven't seen it, or I can't identify it. And I feel privileged to have experienced that. And I know that is not reflective of women in the sector. And so I come at it with a very different perspective. And mine is very, very much focused on building a space in the sector where women feel like they can stay and feel like they're empowered and contribute to something that is long-term. And it's not just a job, but it's a career. And so I hope that the work that I do really translates into that. So I just like to kind of give that history that for me, I don't feel like my gender has held me back, but I know it does for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess advice to women out there would be to join your group.
Yeah. Or for men too, is like, you know, if you have women in your workplace, I encourage them to join the group, because it might be a place where they will feel empowered and will contribute to your organization because they're like, hey, I want to grow. Hey, I learned about this cool opportunity. Hey, you know, I'm going to do this training because someone else did it and it led them to a different career or led them to grow in their own organization. Are you good with me doing that? Like you'd be surprised what the network can do for women. So men, I would say, encourage women to join the group. Women, I would say, encourage you to join the group and be a part of it. If you're not on Facebook, I mean, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, but the conversations that are the most meaningful definitely happen within Facebook. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's just I want there to be a day when it's like women in the workplace is not this stat that is low and a stat that we have to focus on, but we're just talking about the sector and how it's leading, and we're not focusing on the negative side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but that'll
absolutely.
be a long time coming.
Yeah, for sure. It's a long societal shift that needs to happen, right? But I think the important thing is that the conversations are happening, and hopefully people like as a sector, but as a society as well, that we start to be just more open and honest. It seems like that's the path forward, right? So it's exciting to hear that you guys created this successful group that's provided so much help and empowerment for people, for women in the workplace. And I'm excited to hear about it, and I'm excited to keep tabs on you guys and what you get up to, and how how this changes over time. This is good.
Yeah, and I would say too, like, we sell t-shirts for men. So if you feel like you need to support women in wood, you can always get the men's sizing of the shirt. Or you can follow us on anything but Facebook. But yeah, I would just encourage people to elevate the women in their own organization, and, highlight what they're doing that you're so proud of at your company, because it'll just encourage more women to join.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jess, for taking the time to do this. This has been great. I whenever I'm doing these like social conversations, I'm always a little nervous internally. Yeah. And just, I want to, you know what I mean? Cause like you want to say the right thing, and you want to be a good advocate and that kind of thing. And so it's always, but it's fun. I like that. It's exciting because it's challenging, and it provides me opportunity to be honest with myself and to try to check my own biases and that kind of thing. So this has been I really appreciated our conversation. It's been excellent.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening, guys. I know I learned a bunch during that conversation. It really opens your eyes up to the small things that make a big difference, right? And I'm looking forward to going into some unconscious bias training myself, learning about my own biases and my own mind, and how I can further that to help everyone and myself, right? And I hope you guys do the same. So thanks so much, Jessica, for taking the time. That was awesome. I wish you all the luck in the world. I hope that Women in Wood continues to grow and continues to flourish and continues to help people navigate the workplace. It's really, really cool what you guys have done. And I congratulate you. It's just so cool. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. And lots of cool stuff coming down. So come back in a few weeks. I'll have another cool episode for you. Tell a friend, share it on social media, rate and review. All that stuff is the very least you can do for, free content. So thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one. Take it easy, and we'll catch you next time.